My name is Ronak Vyas and this video is a collaboration with Programming Knowledge. In the previous video, we talked about what Spring JPA was and we talked about what JPA was in general. We also talked about the advantages Spring JPA, Spring Data JPA has over JDBC, where for JDBC you need to write native SQL queries and the Spring JPA takes care of all of that implementations for you, and all you need to do is have some function calls which can do all the stuff for you for cloud applications. So in this video, we'll be setting up our repository, the ToDo repository, and we'll see all about the extra dependencies that we need to actually build up our database and also the kind of database we'll be using. So let's get started. So first, this is where we stopped in the previous video. We had made a ToDo repository, which was an interface, and now we'll be doing very little changes to this interface. We will not be actually writing any interface function calls here. We'll just be extending from a different repository provided by JPA, Spring Data JPA, and we'll just get right ahead into using it. So, but first, let's talk about the database which we'll be using for the next few videos. So, the database which we'll be using is called as Apache Derby. So, Apache Derby is an Apache DB subproject, which is an open source relational database implemented entirely in Java and is available under the Apache license. So let's see why we'll be starting with Apache Derby and not MySQL. So Derby has a very small footprint, about 3.5 megabytes, which is really less for the base engine, and embedded JDBC driver. So this is something which we value a lot because it's very fast and it's very quick to actually have the database set up at runtime by Spring, and you just have to implement a service, implement a repository, and Derby and Java and Spring takes care of all of that for you. So we will be getting rid of that very bad arrays.as list function, right? So next, Derby is based on Java, JDBC, and SQL standards. So we will have Derby in a SQL standard, so we can assume that it will definitely have the SQL implementations behind the scenes. Now, since Derby provides an embedded JDBC driver, it lets you embed Derby in any Java-based solution, and that works perfectly because if you not only have a Spring Boot application, but you have a Spring Boot application that's communicating with a different Java application, and both of them are running Derby, then having this will be very easy for you to communicate with the other Java applications, talk to them, and also have a very simple connection where both of them work at ease. Derby also supports the more familiar client-server mode with Derby Network Client, JD Driver, and Derby Network Server. This is something which is out of scope for this video or tutorial, so we'll not be looking much into this. But if you want, the link for this will be in the description, and you can definitely go ahead. And by last, Derby is very easy to install, deploy, and use. So this is also very important for our REST API tutorial because we want to learn how to build APIs and make sure that the database part is being learned on the way. So now that we're new to Derby, let's check out the start page and see how we actually get into it. So we have a lot of examples, demos, how to use Derby with other products, etc., etc. And the first thing which we need to do for Derby is to actually have the dependency inside our pom.xml. So let's open up our pom.xml and let's add in some dependencies for ourselves. So the first one which we need, dependency, yeah. The first one we need is something called as Spring Boot Data JPA. So for that we need a group ID, and the next thing which we need is an artifact ID. Yep. Let me spell dependency correctly again. Great. So now we need to have the group ID and the artifact ID for Spring Boot Data JPA. So I have this right here already so that we don't waste any time. So let me just pull that up. So here we go. So we have our Spring Boot framework, which is the group from which we need it. So let's go and paste it here. The next thing which we need is the artifact ID, which is Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. So this is the name of the dependency, which is Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. So this is something which provides you all the database function calls, methods, classes, interfaces out of the box, just similar to Spring Boot Starter Web, which helps you start a Spring Boot project with very ease. So this will be actually helping us setting up our CRUD repository, which actually will help you get started with how to use it. Now, the next thing which we need, the next dependency that we need is obviously Derby, Apache Derby. So let's actually add that now. So again, we need to have a dependency, and let's close this. Oh, sorry, don't add starters. And cool. So we need a group ID, and the next thing which we need is an artifact ID. Great. And again, we spelled dependency wrong. I don't know why I keep doing that, but great. And let's just copy Derby from here. So it's from org.apache.derby package. Let's go and paste it here. And the name is Derby. And we also have a scope. So let's just copy the entire thing and close this. So here we need this one. Yeah. So this is what are the two dependencies that we need to add to actually include Spring Boot Data, JPA, and Derby inside our application. And now that they are here, all you have to do is go to Maven and update project. And okay. So Maven actually gets the dependencies from the server and adds them to your Maven dependencies list, and you can use it. So now let's see how Apache Derby works. So the best part about having Derby or using Derby is that this is it. This is all you need to do to actually have Derby configured and set up in your application. So basically, what Spring does when you start the server, when you write all your when you finish setting up our database and writing all the function calls, etc., is that it looks at the POM and sees whether it has an in-memory database or an embedded database that it can use. And since we only have Derby inside our POM, it will assume that Derby is the one that we are using and set up and configure it for us at runtime. So that is how we take the how we use the power of Derby to actually build a Spring Boot application with the database. Okay, great. So now that we have our POM ready and we just need nothing else now, let's actually go and write some code to actually set up our repository. So as I said, we will not be writing anything inside the interface. We just have to extend from something. So it extends for something called as CRUD repository. And let me just import it. And this will need two things in the implementation. The first will be what kind of repository are we wanting here. So it's a ToDo repository. So we need the ToDo class to actually for it to map the things in ToDo. So let me just open ToDo. So we need to map the ID, name, summary, description, all of this to our application, right? So for that we need to give it a parameter of ToDo. And the next thing which we need is the data type of the unique ID which we have. So for here, the unique ID is integer ID, which is an integer. So we'll just put this as integer, and we're good to go. Now we told the CRUD repository that the integer is the unique ID, but we haven't specified that here. So all we need to do is just have an ID annotation for our integer, and that will automatically take care or tell that this is an ID, which is by Java X persistence. Great. So what did we learn or what did we do in this tutorial? So we had imported two things. First was Apache Derby, which is an embedded database written by SQL standard, which we'll be using later in the next upcoming videos. and we also added a dependency called as Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. After that, we set up our ToDo repository where we extend from something called as a CRUD repository. So as you know, CRUD stands for create, update, delete, and this repository will handle all the interface and the implementation for all the function calls that we're going to make to add a to-do, add a task, delete a task, update a task, or add one task. And this takes in two parameters. One is the object, which we have the single entity, to-do entity, and the next is the integer. So integer here is basically the data type of the unique ID which we're using, and in our case the unique ID is the integer ID. So we need to mark the ID by saying that this one is unique, which we do by the ID annotation. So now this shows that in our to-do entity, ID is the unique key or the primary key for this scenario. So this is all we have to do, and in the next videos we'll actually start implementing the database, and we'll see that in very less amount of code we can actually, by changing very simple things in our to-do service, we'll be actually writing or finishing using Derby, and then we can start moving on to the SQL database part. So that was it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.